Hello everybody, welcome back. We're going to be talking about session 16 today, and it's our longest session so far, so let's go ahead and get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner. As I ask questions, there will unfortunately be inaudible. I think the direction I wish to go investigating the law of one. However, I have ideas in mind of some questions, inaudible. They may be stupid questions, I don't know, but inaudible. And the next sentence starts inaudible as well, and Don goes on to say, trying to construct a complete unbiased book about the law of one, which itself takes into account the law of one. I hope that you, inaudible, ridiculous. I would like to ask, considering the free will distortion of the law of one, how can the guardians quarantine the earth? Is this quarantine within the free will distortion? I am Ra. The guardians guard the free will distortion of the mind-body-spirit complexes of third density on this planetary sphere. The events which require activation of quarantine were interfering with the free will distortion of mind-body-spirit complexes. So here Don is struggling with his self-consciousness and trying to fit his questions into the areas that Ra wants to talk about, obviously, and he's mumbling a little bit so it doesn't all get picked up on the tape. But then Don asks about the quarantine and the guardians quarantining the earth, and Ra says that the quarantine is not an infringement upon free will because its purpose is actually to protect free will. And so Don goes on to question about this, and in 16.2, Don asks, I may be wrong, but it seems to me that it would be the free will of, say, the Orion group to interfere. How is this balanced against the other concept you just gave? I am Ra. The balancing is from dimension to dimension. The attempts of the so-called crusaders to interfere with free will are acceptable upon the dimension of their understanding. However, the mind-body-spirit complexes of this dimension you call third form a dimension of free will which is not able to, shall we say, recognize in full the distortions towards manipulation. Thus, in order to balance the dimensional variances in vibration, a quarantine was set up, this being a balancing situation whereby the free will of the Orion group is not stopped, but given a challenge. Meanwhile, the third density group is not hindered from free choice. So ultimately, we have the quarantine protecting us from the negative influence, and again, we'll keep going on asking questions about this for the beginning of this session. But the things I'll comment on here are the guardians who quarantine the earth, Ra says at a later time, actually come from the next octave. So these are beings who come from the next octave and are working to serve this octave, and in particular, some of them are working to serve our third density. And when Ra talks about the Council of Saturn, there's 9 on the Council of Saturn, but then there's 24 guardians from the next octave who are watching over the Council of Saturn and are there for the Council of Saturn, who is a part of this octave. They're actually a part of the 8th density, so they're kind of technically part of the next octave as well. They're on that in-between line right there. But the guardians from the next octave are able to be called upon for help, for advice, for help with decision-making. So when they say the guardians, here in the text, it's already been assumed that they're talking about these guardians from the next octave. It's done with a capital G. So I'm going to operate from that assumption, that they're talking about the guardians from the next octave are the ones who have put the quarantine on this planet. It's also implied that the original Yahweh was one of these guardians from the next octave who helped move Martians to Earth, and then they were the ones who caused the free will infringement that ultimately led to the quarantine, that led to biases in our mind-body-spirit complexes that made us more susceptible to negative interference. So that's why we have the quarantine, is because of that genetic manipulation that Yahweh did. And so the quarantine itself is not a free will infringement because it's protecting our free will. We're too susceptible to negative influence. If there wasn't a quarantine, then this likely would have just become a negative planet from all of the interference that went unimpeded by negative entities. It'd just be very obvious from the fourth dimension, the negative fourth dimension, that this planet was susceptible to that. So the quarantine protects us from direct infringement from negative beings because we're already biased towards that infringement. But again, it doesn't completely stop negative entities from contacting Earthlings. It just puts up a roadblock, essentially, so it isn't a free-for-all. So in 16.3, Don asks, could these windows occur? Let the Orion group come through once in a while? Does this have anything to do with the free will distortion? I am Ra, this is correct. Questioner, could you tell me how that works? I am Ra. The closest analogy would be a random number generator within certain limits. So from our perspective, there's essentially a random number generator that's creating these windows. It isn't actually random, but from our perspective, it does appear that a certain dice roll allows the negative entities to come through the quarantine. In 16.5, Don asks, what is the source of this random number generator? Is it created by the Guardians to balance their guardian, or is it a source other than the Guardians? I am Ra. All sources are one. However, we understand your query. The window phenomenon is an other self phenomenon from the Guardians. It operates from the dimensions beyond space-time in what you may call the area of intelligent energy. Like your cycles, such balancing, such rhythms are as a clock striking. In the case of the windows, no entities have the clock. Therefore, it seems random. It is not random in the dimension which produces this balance. That is why we stated the analogy was within certain limits. So, again, it's not totally random, but nobody has the clock, so it appears random. In 16.6, Don asks, then this window balancing prevents the Guardians from reducing their positive polarization by totally eliminating the Orion contact through shielding. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is partially correct. In effect, the balancing allows an equal amount of positive and negative influx, this balanced by the mind-body distortions of the social complex. Thus, in your particular planetary sphere, less negative, as you would call it, information or stimulus is necessary than positive due to the somewhat negative orientation of your social complex distortion. So here in this answer is implying that the quarantine is not something that's unique to our planet. There are other planets who have had a quarantine for one reason or another. But because we've been biased towards the negative, because as a consequence of the genetic manipulation, the quarantine does block out more negative beings and information than it does positive beings or information, because there's some complex balancing that's happening on a higher level than third density, obviously, and it makes sense from their vantage point. And it basically makes sense, right? We have way more negative thought forms that are already available for us as on our societal complex to attach to, so we need an influx of more positive thought forms to balance our own free will so that we realize that there are other options other than just taking these negative thought forms onto ourselves and acting upon them. So in 16.7, Donna asks, in this way, total free will is balanced so that the individual may have an equal opportunity to choose service to others or service to self. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. And in 16.8, Don says, this is a profound revelation, I believe, in the law of free will. Thank you. This is a minor question further to make an example of this principle. But if the Confederation landed on Earth, they would be taken as gods, breaking the law of free will and thus reducing their polarization towards service to all. I assume that the same thing would happen if the Orion group landed. How would this affect their polarization towards service to self if they were able to land and become known as gods? I am Ra. In the event of mass landing of the Orion group, the effect of polarization would be strongly towards an increase in the service to self, precisely the opposite of the former opportunity which you mentioned. And I'm going to go ahead and read the next one too. Questioner, if the Orion group was able to land, would this increase their polarization? What I'm trying to get at is it better for them to work behind the scenes and get recruits, shall we say, from our planet, the person on our planet going towards service to self strictly on his own, using his free will, or is it just as good for the Orion group to land upon our planet and demonstrate remarkable powers and get people like that? I am Ra. The first instance is, in the long run, shall we put it, more salubrious for the Orion group in that it does not infringe upon the law of one by landing, and, thus does its work through those of this planet. In the second circumstance, a mass landing would create a loss of polarization due to the infringement upon the free will of the planet. However, it would be a gamble. If the planet then were conquered and became part of the empire, the free will would then be reestablished. This is restrained in action due to the desire of the Orion group to progress towards the one creator. This desire to progress inhibits the group from breaking the law of confusion. So here Dawn is finding out, essentially, that landing on our planet breaks the law of confusion, which is an important law of our third density experience. And that's why the Confederation has only done it in small instances, and they realized pretty long ago that it caused way more problems for us than helped us, actually. So that's why they don't really do that anymore. The Orion group also prefers to work behind the scenes, because if they were to break the law of confusion, it would also reduce their polarity. If either side breaks the law of confusion, they lose polarity. So the negative path wants to work behind the scenes, wants to contact specific individuals who will then go forth and promulgate their information, individuals who are already incarnated. Whereas if they landed on the planet, they would lose a ton of polarity because of that law of confusion. However, if by landing they were then able to enslave the entire planet and get the entire planet to move towards service to self, and then make the planet harvest service to self, then they would recover all of that polarity. So it's a gamble to them, but it's not a gamble that's worth it to them, because if they lose, then they lose a bunch of polarity. And they're just trying to move forward. And so they can still move forward by working behind the scenes and by gaining polarity via infringement upon free will in an indirect way. Whereas if they were to land, the first reaction to their polarity would be a loss. And that's just not something that they're looking to do. They're constantly trying to gain power. And so, ironically, they're going to take the safe way, the safe route in doing that. In 16.10, Dawn says, "You mentioned the word empire in relation to the Orion group. I have thought for some time that the movie Star Wars was somehow an allegory in part for what is actually happening. Is this correct?" I am Ra. This is correct in the same way that a simple children's story is an allegory for physical/philosophical/social complex distortion/understanding. So here Ra is saying, Star Wars is a story about good and evil battling it out in spaceships, right? So in intergalactic, interplanetary travel and stuff like that. So Ra's saying, it's like a children's allegory for what's going on, essentially. There are bad guys who are trying to enslave, there are good guys who are trying to protect, and there's a lot of that going on that isn't even actually happening directly on our planet that's still affecting our planet. But it's still just a simple allegory. So in 16.11, Dawn says, "Is there a harvest of entities oriented towards service to self like there is a harvest here of entities oriented towards service to others?" I am Ra. There is one harvest. Those able to enter fourth density through vibrational complex levels may choose the manner of their further seeking of the one creator. So here Ra is saying, at harvest time, everyone is evaluated. And if you've been able to gain enough awareness through the energy body to walk the steps of light high enough to make it to the next density, then you get to choose the manner of your further seeking of the one creator. So again, some positive entities come back to Earth and keep reincarnating on Earth, as long as, we're talking about the middle of harvest, not the very end. We're at the very end of the cycle. So a lot of positive entities will probably move on. Some are probably still going to be reincarnating here and starting their fourth density here on Earth. But you get to choose. I'm guessing that in most situations, negative entities go on to negative fourth density, positive entities go on to positive fourth density, unless they decide through their evaluation of self at harvest that they need to learn more lessons in third density, which is, again, probably more of a positive polarity choice to make, whereas the negative polarity wants to move forward and gain more power. I'm thinking of the situation later on that Ra talks about, where two fifth density wanderers came to Venus to try to help the harvest, and instead they polarized negatively. And then when they got to fourth density, they were shocked that they were harvested fourth density negative. I don't think every entity who reaches fourth density negative harvest necessarily is happy to be there once they realize what has happened. So that then requires a retracing of the steps, right? Which I think probably involves incarnating in confusion in a veiled body and then remaking the choice and creating a life experience that hopefully facilitates remaking the choice into moving forward into positive fourth density. There's another citation where Ra gives like a percentage of like how many who are harvested from fourth density negative continue to fifth density negative. And there's like a drop off. Like not every being who makes it to fourth density negative actually really wants to stay there and polarize negatively, because that requires a very strong bias and preference for experience that involves being enslaved, because when you start at the bottom of the fourth density totem pole, you are enslaved by the beings in the Orion Empire who are higher than you, but then also, again, continuing to enslave others in more and more perverse ways. So not every being who harvests to the negative path continues the negative path all the way to sixth density when it stops. Some of them drop off and decide to go back and retrace their steps to repolarize along the positive way. And again, there's a citation later that goes into that even more. And so in 16.12, Don says, "Then as we enter fourth density, there will be a split, shall we say, and part of the individuals who go into the fourth density will go to planets or places where there is service to others, and the other part will go into places where there is service to self. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct." Questioner: Well, the Confederation established its quarantine, I understand, 75,000 years ago. Has the Orion group been attempting to contact any part of this planet prior to that, or did they? How long have they been attempting contact this planet? I am Ra. Approximately 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, an attempt was made. It was not successful. Approximately 3,600 years ago, the group sent an entity of social memory complex to this planetary sphere. This effort was met with some success, but was in the space-time continuum lessened in impact. Since approximately 3,300 years ago in your measurement, this group has constantly been working upon the harvest just as the Confederation. Okay, so firstly, Ra gives the wrong number in that session. I read the correct number. It was 3,600 and 3,300, but Ra actually in this first time says 2,600 and 2,300. In the next session, they correct this because obviously it was wrong, and through these next questions, we'll know why. In 1614, Don says, "Can you name the entity that they sent here 2,600 years ago?" Which is actually 3,600 years ago. I am Ra, this entity named by your peoples, Yahweh. So, as we go on to talk about, this was when Moses and his people fled Egypt. The entity, the social memory complex, came and was able to contact that group of people and establish a religion that obviously had a lot of controlling aspects. And it was at this time that they were really able to make their biggest inroad on our social memory complex. And from 300 years after that on, they have been a part of our sphere working towards harvest just as the Confederation has. So for the past 3,300 years, the Confederation has been intensely involved with our social memory complex thanks to the inroads they were able to make impersonating the original Yahweh. So we're going to talk about this just a little bit more here. 1615, Don asks, "Can you tell me the origin of the 10 Commandments?" I am Ra. The origin of these commandments follows the law of negative entities impressing information upon positively oriented mind-body-spirit complexes. The information attempted to copy or ape positivity while retaining negative characteristics. So again, Ra talks about this a lot with using discernment for like channeled materials and stuff. Negative entities, when they contact positive groups, they have to pretend to be positive. They have to pretend to be service to others. But they twist things in just the right way to make it so it actually becomes a tool of control and enslavement. So in 16.16, Dawn asks, was this done by the Orion group? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, what was their purpose in doing this? I am Ra. The purpose of the Orion group, as mentioned before, is conquest and enslavement. This is done by finding and establishing an elite and causing others to serve the elite through various devices, such as the laws you mention and others given by this entity. So Yahweh gave the 10 Commandments as well as other laws. I'm not super familiar explicitly with Judaism. I was raised Catholic, so I am familiar with like the Old Testament. And there are just so many rules and regulations, right? For those who choose to live as Orthodox Jews, I'm not saying obviously that makes them negative, but they're following laws that have been given to control them. Laws about behavior that are relatively arbitrary and that aren't really serving the one infinite creator. They're serving a distorted version of the one infinite creator who wants to enslave and cause and create an elite. So again, laws about what to eat. There's lots of laws about sacrifice and when to sacrifice animals and these kinds of things. And, ultimately things that a negative, quote unquote, God would want. A fourth or fifth density negative social memory complex. Things that they enjoy seeing humans do because they're controlling them. And again, this type of control too limits beings' potential access to infinity, because when your God is telling you these very specific rules to follow, which is a part of a lot of religions, obviously. We're talking about one specific religion right now, and other religions have come from this religion. But these really strict, relatively arbitrary rules just limit our cognitive ability, make us more likely to defer to authority in the future, because we've been deferring to authority for so long with our behaviors on a daily basis, makes us conditioned then to surrender our free will to someone who is above us, especially if that means we get to be a part of an elite group. So here in 16.18, Dawn asks, was the recipient of the laws of the 10 Commandments positively or negatively oriented? The recipient was one of extreme positivity, thus accounting for some of the pseudo-positive characteristics of the information received. As with contacts which are not successful, this entity, vibratory complex Moisha, did not remain a credible influence among those who had heard the philosophy of one, and this entity was removed from this third density vibratory level in a lessened or saddened state, having lost what you may call the honor and faith with which he had begun the conceptualization of the law of one and the freeing of those who were of his tribes, as they were called at that time space. So, I may have mentioned this before, I'm not sure, but a lot of theologians, not a lot, there are theologians who believe that Moses was exiled from Egypt because he was a priest of Aten. And the timelines sort of add up. We had the Confederation contacted Akhenaten, and he was able to decree the philosophy of the one, which Ra says here that that's what Moses was teaching. And then after Akhenaten died, the greater social complex of Egypt wanted to revert back to the religious expression that they had been indulging in before. And so they got rid of all the evidence of Akhenaten's teachings that they could. So, like I said, some theologians believe that Moses may have just been a priest of Aten, and that's why him and his people were driven from Egypt, because they were still true believers in the one God. And, when you look at the Old Testament, a lot of things line up with Egyptian theology, and, they came from Egypt. There are prayers that come from the time of Akhenaten that are in the Bible that line up really pretty well In particular, there's a prayer called the Hymn to the Aten, and it is very, very similar to Psalm 104, if you want to look that little bit up. So it's the theory that Akhenaten essentially created monotheism, but then Yahweh was able to come in and distort that monotheism into just a strange thing where that monotheism became like the worship of one polytheistic God, essentially, where yes, there are many gods, but this God is your God, and this is the one God that you're supposed to follow. This is the most important one God. Not that everything is God, everyone is God, all of creation is divine, but that there is a specific entity that you have to worship. So it was a very clever thing that Orion came in and did for the poor beings who followed Moses out of Egypt. And I think Ra's telling of our history of the battleground of the Confederation and Orion within our societal complex sort of tells this story in the same way. So ultimately, Moses was a very positive being who believed in the philosophy of the One, preached the philosophy of the One, but then made contact with this negative Yahweh who, as we're going to find out here, was able to do things in the physical that convinced his peoples that he was real and therefore and powerful, and therefore they should follow him. And then Moses was lessened in his state from having had to do this sort of slide towards the negative polarity with his teachings. In 16.19, Dunn asks, if this entity was positively oriented, how was the Orion group able to contact him? I am Ra. This was an intensive, shall we say, battleground between positively oriented forces of Confederation origin and negatively oriented sources. The one called Moisha was open to impression and received the Law of One in its most simple form. However, the information became negatively oriented due to his people's pressure to do specific physical things in the third density planes. This left the entity open for the type of information and philosophy of a self-service nature. So I think this is a very important concept that defines the negative polarity and shows where we as a people are most susceptible to being influenced by the negative polarity. We want proof, which is the opposite of faith, right? And when we're asking for proof, if the Orion group has an opportunity to do that in a way that isn't necessarily infringing on our free will because we're asking for it, they will. And then that gives humans a level of trust in this being, this great, powerful being who's able to, again, like set a bush on fire and to have a booming voice that everyone can hear and whatever things that Yahweh did in the Old Testament. I don't know. But all of these things proved the existence of this being, and therefore it became easy to follow what this being told them to do because they knew that Yahweh really existed. And so when we're looking for proof, more often than not, we're calling for a negative being to fill that role. Because if we want to surrender to faith and trust that we're doing the right thing when we're choosing service to others, regardless of whatever proof we have, that carries with it so much more energy and power than if we do it because we believe that there's a daddy up there telling us that that's what we're supposed to do, right? So when we've got a daddy God giving us explicit rules, it makes it easier, right? It makes it so you don't have to think so much. It makes it so you don't have to make choices on your own. And that's why it's an infringement upon free will, because you're not making choices on your own. You're just following an authority and believing that that's going to get you into heaven or whatever. So again, too, that's why Ra comes to teach us through this medium, through being channeled through little Carla, because it's easy for anyone to dismiss this in whatever way that they want to, in whatever way makes it unbelievable to them. That maintains our free will. It's our free will choice to believe this. Whereas when Ra came and walked among Egypt, that was an infringement upon their free will. They thought it wouldn't be, because they thought that the Egyptians were open to this kind of mingling of higher density entities and wouldn't be so influenced, but ultimately it was. They did influence these beings to a higher degree because they were seen as other than. They were seen as greater than is the important thing, I believe. So when Yahweh came and was like, look at all these things I can do that you can't explain, then these beings were like, oh yes, maybe if I don't follow Yahweh, that he's going to shoot me down with a lightning bolt and punish me and do all this. And so I have to do that. And I don't get to make any of my own choices. I just give my free will up to Yahweh. And that's really why wanting proof on the spiritual path is such a slippery, slippery slope. And why not having proof allows far more free will in the being of an entity. So this is just your encouragement to surrender to faith, to trust what's inside of you, to trust what feels right to you more than any other authority. I mean, don't take me as an authority. Don't believe what I say blindly. I'm not doing this so that people believe what I say blindly. I'm doing this so that people who want to understand what Ra's saying in plainer language have an opportunity to do that. And still, don't believe me. Don't believe just Ra. Believe what feels right to you. Be internally motivated by your own feelings and your own decisions. And that ultimately, again, is what serves the Creator far more than following a specific set of rules or rituals that are given to you by a higher density entity. Because the Creator doesn't want these cookie cutter experiences where everyone's doing the same thing. Because nothing new is discovered when everybody's doing the same thing. But if you're going on your own, using your own free will to make your own choices, it's possible that you will find new experiences for the Creator, and that's what the Creator wants. And that ultimately is also why the service to self path is the path which is not, because it's a path that wants to control the behavior of others and put those expected behaviors inside a tiny little box where there isn't room to deviate from those expected behaviors, and therefore there isn't the potential to expand the infinity of the Creator. So in 16.20, Don says, it would be unlike an entity fully aware of the knowledge of the law of one to ever say, thou shalt not. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. So again, the Ten Commandments, I think we're all very familiar with the Ten Commandments. In theory, the Ten Commandments aren't, for the most part, going to polarize somebody negatively. They're good ideas for good behavior, right? Don't commit adultery, don't kill, don't steal, listen to your mom and dad, don't lie. Like all of these things, in theory, are ways to behave in a good pro-social way, right? But the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, you shall not have any other gods before me. And that, again, is creating this weird idea where God isn't the one, God is this specific being. God is acknowledging that there are other gods out there, but I'm the God that you're supposed to be listening to. I'm the God that you put on the highest pedestal, and that's just weird, right? And again, for everyone who's read the Law of One, it isn't possible to displease the Creator by doing the wrong thing. The Creator is happy with all experiences. The Creator wants the service to self and the service to others path. The service to self path is built on falsity, but that doesn't mean that the Creator is looking down on you and judging you and mad at you for not choosing the right choice, the right polarity, or doing the most precise right thing in the moment. There's no judgment like that from the Creator. So the Ten Commandments, though, instills this idea that there is this judgment from the Creator, that there is this watchful eye, making sure that you aren't telling a lie, making sure that you aren't stealing or killing or any of these things and spiting you because of it. As Ross says, we should experience all things desired. And ultimately, if you want to polarize positively, if you want to recognize the Law of One, a lot of these desires need to be experienced in your mind so that you aren't infringing upon the free will of others, because that's what, murder is doing. That's what often theft is doing. But ultimately, the sum total of the Ten Commandments is infringing upon free will of those that are expected to believe in those things. So free will's a really tricky thing, right? Like the space between letting your own free will be infringed upon and not infringing upon the free will of others. Really, the ultimate thing for positive entities is to do our best to not infringe upon the free will of others. That means don't manipulate, don't lie, because a lie is usually a manipulation. Don't try to control, don't try to enslave, don't try to intimidate, all of these things that go into manipulation and coercion. That's really what the positive path tries to leave behind. And the 10 Commandments are very coercive. Even if some of them talk about protecting the free will of others, ultimately they themselves are a free will infringement. It's kind of like how the idea of like if social laws, like the laws of our modern society, the laws that we have on the books, like don't kill people or you'll go to jail, don't steal or you'll go to jail. If you're only doing these things to avoid punishment, then that doesn't mean nearly as much as coming to the realization that you shouldn't do these things because you're ultimately just harming yourself by doing these things, because by infringing upon the free will of others, you're perpetuating infringement, which ultimately just is infringement upon the self. So 16.21, Dawn asks, can you give me some kind of history of your social memory complex and how you became aware of the law of one? I am Ra. The path of our learning is graven in the present moment. There is no history as we understand your concept. Picture, if you will, a circle of being. We know the Alpha and Omega as infinite intelligence. The circle never ceases. It is present. The densities we have traversed at various points in the circle correspond to the characteristics of cycles. First, the cycle of awareness. Second, the cycle of growth. Third, the cycle of self-awareness. Fourth, the cycle of love or understanding. Fifth, the cycle of light or wisdom. Sixth, the cycle of light-love, love-light, or unity. Seventh, the gateway cycle. Eighth, the octave, which moves into a mystery we do not plumb. So this is again Ra being a bit coy, Dawn asking about history of the social memory complex, and Ra giving a very universal answer to not place emphasis on their own specific experience, because that doesn't really matter. All beings ultimately progress along the same cycle of densities and gain awareness that way. So 16.22, Dawn doesn't actually press for any more. Dawn says, thank you very much. In previous material before we communicated with you, it was stated by the Confederation that there is actually no past or future. All is present. Would this be a good analogy? I am Ra. There is past, present, and future in third density. In an overview such as an entity may have, removed from the space-time continuum, it may be seen that in the cycle of completion, there exists only the present. We, ourselves, seek to learn this understanding. At the 7th level or dimension, we shall, if our humble efforts are sufficient, become one with all, thus having no memory, no identity, no past or future, but existing in the all. So here Ra is saying that even from their vantage point, they're still trying to grasp the infinity of the present moment, that all things are happening in the present moment. And when you remove yourself from space-time, it's much easier to see that. But we are in space-time. We are in third density. There is past, present, and future in third density, and there is a purpose for that. As there is a purpose for just about everything we do in third density. It's a very regulated experiment. I don't want to say controlled experiment. I don't know if that's true, but there's been a lot of trial and error to figure out how third density best expresses itself. And as it is, being in space-time, having a past, present, and a future is how we learn and grow and gain awareness in third density. And so Ra's saying it's not necessarily helpful to think of everything as happening all at once in your third density, but we are seeking to become that, which is 7th density, which is when you become all there is with no identity, no time. It's just everything experiencing itself all at once. And that's ultimately what it means when people say time is an illusion. It ultimately is an illusion, but it's a purposeful illusion. There's a reason why we have this illusion and why we're working within a construct of linear time. So in 16.23, Dawn says, does this mean that you would have awareness of all that is? I am Ra. This is partially correct. It is our understanding that it would not be our awareness, but simply awareness of the Creator. In the Creator is all that there is. Therefore, this knowledge would be available. So again, they're still reaching for this. They're still reaching for becoming all there is in a literal sense, which is what happens in seventh density. They see it, they can feel it, they can taste it. They know that that's how the Creator really experiences itself, but they are still also working within the illusion of linear time, because otherwise they wouldn't be here talking to us about past, present, and future. But in seventh density, you just rejoin the Creator and become aware of all there is existing all at once. So in 16.24, Dawn says, I was wondering how many inhabited planets there are in our galaxy, and if they all reach higher density by the law of one, or if there is any other way. It doesn't seem to me that there would be any other way to reach higher density. Is this correct? I am Ra. Please restate your query. Questioner. How many inhabited planets are there in our galaxy? I am Ra. We are assuming that you intend all dimensions of consciousness or densities of awareness in this question. Approximately 1/5 of all planetary entities contain awareness of one or more densities. Some planetary spheres are hospitable only for certain densities. Your planetary sphere, for instance, is at this time hospitable to levels or densities 1, 2, 3, and 4. So here Ra is estimating that 1/5 of all planetary entities contain awareness of one or more densities. That would mean being at least second density, because Ra says that first density, quote-unquote, planets, they don't consider actual beings or planets yet, because they haven't learned awareness. That's what the first density is about. They're still existing in this unformed, preformed state of intelligent infinity where things haven't been formed yet. So 1/5 of the planets has moved past this state, essentially, which honestly seems low to me. The idea that 4/5 of planets in our galaxy are still in first density, or what, I wonder if that counts planets like Mars. Is Mars considered a part of the 4/5? Because there aren't any, I'm assuming there aren't any densities on Mars. I think Mars is essentially just a dead rock at this point, right? I don't think that there are higher densities existing on Mars. I don't know. Interesting thought, but I would probably put Mars in the 4/5, considering how big that number is. So in 16.26, Dawn asks, well, roughly how many total planets in this galaxy of stars that we're in have aware life regardless of density? I am Ra, approximately 670,000,000, which is 67 million. Questioner. Can you tell me what percentage of those are third, fourth, fifth, sixth density, etc.? Roughly, very roughly. I am Ra. A percentage 17 for first density, a percentage 20 for second density, a percentage 27 for third density, a percentage 16 for fourth density, a percentage 6 for fifth density. Other information must be withheld. The free will of your future is not making this available. We shall speak on one item. There is a fairly large percentage, approximately 35% of the intelligent planets, which do not fit into the percentiles. These mysteries are of 6th and 7th density and are not available for our speaking. So honestly, this is an interesting answer from Ra, but I don't know. It doesn't actually really mean anything. It's hard to gain any meaning from this, right? Okay, so certain percentage is this, because also, doesn't it overlap? Because Ra says that our planet is hospitable to densities 1, 2, 3, and 4, so giving a percentage for each specific density seems in and of itself inaccurate, but those are the numbers Ra gives because Dawn asks. And in 16.28, Dawn says, well, this first 5 densities, have all of them progressed from third density by knowledge and application of the law of one? I am Ra. This is correct. This is ultimately what the answer Dawn was looking for was, is there another way to progress through the densities without awareness of the law of one or polarizing service to self? Dawn's still trying to conceptualize these ideas, and basically Ra's saying that that's it. It's the progression through the densities. All beings of this octave are going through these densities. And in 16.29, Don asks, then the only way for a planet to get out of the situation that we are in, or the only way for the population, is to become aware of and start practicing the law. Is this correct? And Ra says, this is correct. And in 1630, Don says, can you tell me what percentage of third, fourth, and fifth density planets which you have spoken of here are negatively polarized towards service for self? I am Ra. This is not a query to which we may speak given the law of confusion. We may say only that negatively or self-service-oriented planetary spheres are much fewer. To give you exact numbers would not be appropriate. In general, the rough number that Ra gives at other times is 10%. 10% of beings, planets, etc. harvest negative on the space-time continuum. So I'm guessing that's probably the answer, but Ra doesn't want to give a specific answer, says it would break the law of confusion. I'm guessing it would be just as meaningless. At least to me, I don't really see any meaning in these numbers, because what are we going to do with that? But Ra doesn't want to talk about this. So in 16.31, Don says, I would like to make an analogy about why there are fewer negatively oriented and ask you if the analogy is good. In a positively oriented society with service to others, it would be simple to move a large boulder by getting everyone to help move it. In a society oriented towards service to self, it would be much more difficult to get everyone to work on the boulder for the good of all. Therefore, it is much easier to get things done, to create the service to other principle, and to grow in positively oriented communities than it is in negative. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. So really, again, we're going to talk about this more and more as it goes on, but positive entities are unifying their will, and that makes it easier to get things done, whereas negative entities are all seeing themselves as individuals and focused on their own individual desires, which makes it much harder for them to get anything done on a collective level. And I think we see this manifest more and more in the chaos that we are experiencing in our political sphere. Not to get into politics, but I think most people know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of disintegration of the cohesion that has been existing in the political arena. A lot of things are breaking down, and that's a symptom of how Ra says in the short run we're having more and more negative societal structures, but also more and more light means that the secrets and the darkness that these beings were able to hide in are being exposed. So things are crumbling, and everyone's kind of out for themselves that are in the negative polarity, at least. So in 16.32, Don says, thank you very much. Can you tell me how the Confederation of Planets was formed and why? I am Ra. The desire to serve begins, in the dimension of love or understanding, to be an overwhelming goal of the social memory complex. Thus, those percentiles of planetary entities, plus approximately 4% more of whose identity we cannot speak, found themselves long, long ago in your time seeking the same thing, service to others. The relationship between these entities as they entered an understanding of other beings, other planetary entities, and other concepts of service was to share and continue together these commonly held goals of service. Thus, each voluntarily placed the social memory complex data in what you may consider a central thought complex available to all. This then created a structure whereby each entity could work in its own service while calling upon any other understandings needed to enhance the service. This is the cause of the formation and the manner of working of the Confederation. So essentially, in the density of compassion and love, our desire to serve becomes more and more and more of an overwhelming part of our identity. And so those social memory complexes who feel that way have formed a confederation. Again, this confederation is local, but each confederation then forms its own social memory complex, is essentially, I believe, what Ra's saying here. Whereas each social memory complex offers their social memory to all the other entities of the confederation, so that information can then be called upon by anybody in the Confederation across any of the social memory complexes in the Confederation. They are still unique social memory complexes, but They all also have access to each other's memories and experiences and understandings so that those can be pulled upon to allow a better service, more opportunities for service, a better facilitation of service to others. Because again, the overwhelming desire starts in fourth density, but fourth density beings don't really have a lot of wisdom, right? But then there are fifth and sixth density memories of the Confederation who are also there with their social memory complex. And these fourth density entities can then access their accumulated wisdom so that when they act in service to others, they aren't being so naive. They have access to the experiences and the failures of those who have progressed and experienced more than them. So I believe that that's what Roz means when they say, thus each voluntarily placed the social memory complex data in what you may consider a central thought complex available to all. So that's what makes the Confederation. They have all agreed to work together and to share each other's experiences and memories. And again, this is just another step on the path to reunification with the all. It's just as we reunify, we just add more and more to our bubble. That bubble expands and expands and expands until finally we get to seventh density and we just become one with all. So in 16.33, Dawn asks, with such a large number of planets in this galaxy, I was wondering if you say there are approximately 500 Confederation planets. That seems to me to be a relatively small percentage of the total number of fourth and fifth density planets around. Is there any reason for this relatively small percentage in this Confederation? I am Ra. There are many confederations. This confederation works with the planetary spheres of 7 of your galaxies, if you will, and is responsible for the callings of the densities of these galaxies. So here Ra's saying, and we're going to go on, Dawn's going to ask them to define the word galaxy, and I'll just go ahead and read that one next. 16.34, Dawn says, would you define the word galaxy as you just used it? And Ra says, we use that term in this sense as you would use star systems. So that's what they mean, is 7 star systems worth of planetary entities. I think they said at another point like 50 planets and 500 civilizations across 7 galaxies, so across 7 star systems. And that would mean maybe even more than 7 stars, though, because a lot of star systems are binary. So, yeah, but 7 star systems. And so, yeah, our confederation, again, it's local. It works with a small area. There are different confederations that work with different quote-unquote physical loci. And in 16.35, Dawn says, I'm a little bit confused as to how many total planets, then, roughly, does the confederation that you are in serve? I am Ra. I see the confusion. We have difficulty with your language. The galaxy term must be split. We call galaxy that vibrational complex that is local. Thus, your sun is what we would call the center of a galaxy. We see you have another meaning for this term. So it's pretty interesting here that Ra has misdefined this word, and it goes to show that they aren't just using Carla's repository of language and vocabulary, because Carla probably would not have made this mistake. But yes, they've been saying galaxy to mean star system, and obviously we mean galaxy as Dawn goes on in 16.36. Dawn says, yes, in our science, the term galaxy refers to the lenticular star system that contains millions and millions of stars, and this had occurred earlier in our communications, this area of confusion. I'm glad to get it cleared up. Now, using the term galaxy in the sense that I just gave you of the lenticular star system that contains millions of stars, do you know of the evolution in other galaxies besides this one? I am Ra. We are aware of life in infinite capacity. You are correct in this assumption. Questioner, can you tell me if the progression of life in the other galaxies is similar to the progression in this one? I am Ra. The progression is somewhat close to the same, asymptotically approaching congruency throughout infinity. The free choosing of what you call galactic systems causes variations of an extremely minor nature from one of your galaxies to another. So an asymptote is a curved line that gets closer and closer to a straight line, but never actually reaches that. So essentially what Ra is saying here is that the further along the progression of a galaxy, essentially the closer that they are in how they manifest, but they're never exactly the same, but they get closer and closer to being congruent. And again, Dawn is trying to figure out, do all planets, galaxies, universes progress through the densities via the law of one? And the answer is yes, at least as far as Ra knows and understands. And here then Dawn asks, and then the law of one is truly universal in creating the progression toward the 8th density or octave in all galaxies. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. There are infinite forms, infinite understandings, but the progression is one. So, again, our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, is a logos. Our sun is a sublogos. And each logos has its own expression of the infinite nature of reality as it progresses through the densities. Each sublogos refines that into their own very minutely different expression of that evolution. And for all galaxies in this octave, the progression is one. It's all the same. In 16.39, Dawn asks, I am assuming it is not necessary for an individual to understand the law of one to go from 3rd to 4th density. Is this correct? I am Ra. It is absolutely necessary that an entity consciously realize it does not understand in order for it to be harvestable. Understanding is not of this density. So I feel like this is a big response from Ra that a lot of conversation and thought revolves around. That understanding is not of this density. And that's something that needs to be consciously realized. Even if you pierce the veil to a high degree via polarizing, and you gain a lot of quote-unquote understanding, on some level you have to accept that there is no full understanding. There is no full awareness while incarnated, while veiled in this density. The purpose of this density is confusion. Now, the purpose for being who wants to be conscious in this density is to slowly remove layers of that confusion to get to a less distorted, less confused state of operation. But it's basically impossible to be completely undistorted while in a human body on planet Earth. So you can gain more and more understanding, but you cannot have full understanding. And if you think that you have it all figured out, if you think you have an answer to absolutely everything without any shade of confusion or doubt, then you're probably not operating in a way that is harvestable, in a way that will move you into 4th density, because you're operating inherently from a misconception of your own capabilities. And so in 1640, Dawn says, that is a very important point. I used the wrong word. What I meant to say was, I believe that it was not necessary for an entity to be consciously aware of the law of one to go from 3rd to 4th density. I am Ra. This is correct. In 1641, Dawn asks, at what point in the densities is it necessary for an entity to be consciously aware of the law of one to progress? I am Ra. The 5th density harvest is of those whose vibratory distortions consciously accept the honor duty of the law of one. This responsibility/honor is the foundation of this vibration. So in 4th density, we're just there to love. We're just there to have love and compassion and learn how to be of and operate with a desire to serve. To harvest into 5th density, you have to really accept the honor duty of the law of one and what that means and how to integrate that wisdom, that knowing, that understanding into your service. So in 4th density, we can still serve in a lot of foolish ways, right? And that's where we get the concept of martyrdom here in our 3rd density, when beings who become of a 4th density vibration, but not quite a 5th density vibration, might be serving in what could be considered ways that are lacking wisdom. And some beings who are, let's say, probably wanderers who have a bias towards wisdom can look at those 4th density entities and see a lot of problems. And then that becomes judgment. And so I think that's one of the ways where you have to accept that there is no understanding in this density, that beings are just going to be doing their best from their point of operation, and we can't really expect them to be full of love and wisdom both at all times, and that being full of love is enough. Even if there's no wisdom in that love, even if you perceive folly and an ignorance in those loving choices, if those choices are truly coming from a compassionate place and wanting to help others and wanting to help the social memory complex and the societal complex, that is still so valid and actually really incredibly important, more important than having wisdom and understanding in this density. So in 1642, Dawn asks, can you tell me a little bit about this honor/responsibility concept? I am Ra. Each responsibility is an honor. Each honor, a responsibility. Not a very evocative answer, but ultimately, I believe Ra is saying that once you reach the wisdom density, then you see the responsibility necessary in acting with wisdom to the best of your ability, to not infringe upon the free will of others. And then you also see that responsibility as an honor instead of a burden. Whereas in third density, we can see a lot of our responsibilities as burdens. And like I talked about in the last time, it helps a lot to reframe our responsibilities as I get tos instead of I have tos, which I think also then helps frame it as an honor, like an honor that we get to live the lives that we get to live, and we get to do all of the amazing things in our bodies that we get to do, even if it does feel like a burden sometimes. That's totally normal and understandable. But we have the power in our mind to reframe these things into being an honor. So each responsibility is an honor, each honor a responsibility. I do think that, if you meditate on that and you think about that, it can be very evocative. But as far as answering Dawn's question directly, it's just doesn't seem like that right off the bat. But when you do think about honor and responsibility, there's a lot to unpack there, especially from the perspective of a wanderer. So in 1643, Dawn asks, I want to ask you a rather questionable question. I may not put it in the book. I was wondering if cattle mutilations that we now experience across the country and elsewhere could be explained by you. I am Ra. The greater part of your so-called mutilations take place according to the ways of your second density beings which feed upon carrion. A portion of these so-called mutilations are those which are of what you may call multidimensional type, a thought form construct using various parts in order to have life and being in third density. So I'm going to read the next few questions that continue to talk about this, and then I'll talk about it all at once. So, questioner, where do these thought forms come from? I am Ra. This is a very ambiguous question. However, we will attempt to answer. Firstly, they come from the Creator. Secondly, they come from what you may call lower astral and plane thought. Thirdly, in construct visualization complex, they reside in part beneath the crust of your planet. Questioner, are these one form in particular? I am Ra. These entities may take any thought form associated with an emotion of fear or terror. Questioner, are these thought forms able to attack only cattle, or can they also attack human beings? I am Ra. These thought forms cannot attack third density beings. So Dawn takes a hard turn here in his questioning, and obviously he has reasons for this in his own mind, what led him to make this choice of questioning. But I think the hallmark, essentially, of cattle mutilations, this not being something that I've spent a lot of time going into, is the idea that these cattle are found dead and harvested, and there is a noticeable lack of blood. So I'm assuming what is happening here is that these lower astral beings are consuming the blood and specific body parts, organs, whatever, of these cattle, and then they are using that to take a form of fear or terror in other beings. So they can't attack humans. They can only attack second density beings. They attack these cattle, and then they use that blood energy that they've harvested to take a more corporeal form that third density beings can then see that is a manifestation of their terror. So I think in Harry Potter, this concept is called a boggart. A boggart? Is that what it is? The concept of a thought form that will reflect to you your deepest fear, or the thing that will just terrify you the most. So I guess I don't really have much more to say about that. Just to reiterate that lower astral beings will attack second density beings, consume their blood and organs, and then that allows them to take on a visible thought form that is associated with an emotion of fear or terror. And presumably then they use that thought form to terrorize third density beings. I'm guessing there's also a potential to terrorize second density beings with that thought form too, if there was some end goal that you could get by inciting mass panic in a herd of cattle or whatever like that. So that is essentially what Ra says creates these cattle mutilation scenarios and why. So we get another hard pivot. 16.47, Dawn asks, can you tell me of the silver flecks that we have found sometimes on our faces or elsewhere? I am Ra. These of which you speak are a materialization of a subjectively oriented signpost indicating to one mind-body-spirit complex and no other a meaning of subjective nature. Questioner, who creates the silver flecks? Are they real? I am Ra. Picture, if you will, the increasing potential for learned teaching. At some point, a sign will be given to indicate the appropriateness or importance of that learned teaching. The entity itself, in cooperation with the inner planes, creates whatever signpost is most understandable or noticeable to it. Questioner, you're saying that we ourselves then create these. I am Ra. Entities consciously do not create these. The roots of mind complex, having touched and understanding intelligent infinity, create them. So, the silver flecks are a phenomenon that Dawn, Carla, and Jim experienced from time to time. I believe they usually appeared on Carla's skin. They were little hexagonal flecks of iridescent whatever. They didn't know what they were. And they knew at least one other person who had experienced this specific subjectively oriented signpost. Another woman that they met at a conference or something, I think. But essentially, Ra is saying that they're a type of synchronicity that is a confirmation that a area of learned teaching is appropriate or important. So it's just a guidepost telling you, yes, go in this direction. Yes, you're on the right path. And it's subjective, as Roth emphasizes. And they do talk about this later, too, about how synchronicities are subjective and meant for the person who is experiencing them, and that there is a potential for free will infringement if you are kind of sharing this subjective synchronicity with too many people. This is a concept that comes up later that Ra talks about, I think probably much later, maybe with the hawk. But yes, this is a subjectively oriented signpost. Carla would get silver flecks on her when they were having specific conversations. At homecoming one year, Jim offered to show us some of the flecks, and my jaw was on the floor when he offered this, and he went into his room, and he couldn't find them. He couldn't turn up the little vial of silver flecks, which did not surprise me, because again, I feel like it might have been an infringement upon free will to show us these magical little silver flecks that they had collected off of Carla's skin. I'm pretty sure he said they used tape. I think they were in tape. I think they were in a little vial stuck to pieces of Scotch tape that they had pulled them off of her skin with. But I never saw them. But apparently Jim still has some of these somewhere. In Tilting at Windmills, Carla says that for a period of time it was happening all of the time. That they were finding silver flecks on Carla's skin, and that it was Dawn who would preserve them in little bits of Scotch tape. So essentially, when we experience these kinds of synchronistic signposts, it's the roots of our mind complex in cooperation with the inner planes, creates this symbol, this symbolic occurrence that has meaning to us. And that is essentially what a synchronicity is, right? It has to be subjectively meaningful in a way that catches our attention. So in 1650, Dawn says, "Thank you. Is it possible for you to give a small description of the conditions in fourth density?" I am Ra. We ask you to consider as we speak that there are no words for positively describing fourth density. We can only explain what is not and approximate what is. Beyond fourth density, our ability grows more limited still until we become without words. That which fourth density is not. It is not of words, unless chosen. It is not of heavy chemical vehicles for body complex activities. It is not of disharmony within self. It is not of disharmony within peoples. It is not within limits of possibility to cause disharmony in any way. Approximations of positive statements. It is a plane of a type of bipedal vehicle which is much denser and more full of life. It is a plane wherein one is aware of the thoughts of other selves. It is a plane where one is aware of the vibrations of other selves. It is a plane of compassion and understanding of the sorrows of third density. It is a plane striving towards wisdom or light. It is a plane wherein individual differences are pronounced, although automatically harmonized by group consensus. So this is a pretty big answer from Ra with a lot of things to consider, I think. When I see people say, "Oh, we're in fourth density now, we're fully in fourth density, we've made the transition," I think of this quote, because I think by the litmus of this quote, we are not in fourth density yet. We are transitioning to fourth density. However, I don't know if any of these things quite apply to our experience. We're still speaking with words, and it's not a choice. That's the only way we really have to communicate. We have heavy chemical vehicles for body complex activities. We have disharmony within ourselves. We have disharmony amongst each other. It is within the limits of possibility to cause disharmony. It's very easy, actually, to cause disharmony if one wants to. We aren't really aware of the thoughts of other selves unless they deliberately share them via words. We aren't really necessarily aware of the vibrations of other selves, though I think that's probably more easily intuited by piercing the veil in a third density body than actually seeing the thoughts of other selves. It is a plane of compassion and understanding of the sorrows of third density. I think that's a really key point for me for evaluating my own position of operation. I think having a lot of compassion and understanding for the sorrows of third density is a really important thing that we can experience and strive for, to have more acceptance for the confusion that people are operating within in third density. I think that's very apparent in fourth density, but I do think that the more you polarize, the more you do see that everyone is really trying their best, but they're just so confused between all of the distortions of the planet and their own personal distortions from their life, and the overwhelming feeling of trying to integrate the distortions of everyone around them. This just creates such a confused mind-body-spirit complex in so many scenarios. It takes so much work and effort to peel back those layers of confusion, and it's possible to begin peeling the onion a little bit. And I think the more you do peel that onion, the more then you feel that compassion and understanding for the sorrows of third density as a whole, not in a way where it's like, oh, you feel sorry for this specific group, but you don't feel sorry for this specific group. That kind of thing, where you can just sort of see the human condition as the human condition and have a lot of compassion for that. So we still have quite a bit of work before we are fully in fourth density. Our planet is there, but our society is not there. So we have a lot of thought forms from the group mind that are still contributing to the inability to manifest what Ra describes here as fourth density. Not within the limits of possibility to cause disharmony in any way. Like, we're still a ways off from that. There's still a lot of societal issues that we have to work through, and it will probably take a little bit of time. It might not, as Ross says, it's totally possible for all of us in one moment to shift our thinking in a way that we have access to the social memory complex. Because we are in a fourth density planet right now. that social memory complex is there and is available. We'll get there. We're working towards it. We will get there eventually. I do think, though, that we have some time of healing and amelioration that we still have to go through before it's not within the limits of possibility to cause disharmony in any way. I think we can create bubbles. I think we can create small, harmonious groups of beings that are beginning to work with the earliest levels of fourth density harmony. That's honestly my highest hope for what I'm trying to do in my Discord group, is to put on those training wheels and to try to act in a way as if we were in a fourth density group mind. It's sort of how Ross says, second density becomes third density via pets, when we put vestments on our pets to clothe them in the ideas of third density. That's sort of what I feel like is the purpose of our Discord group, is to put on the cloak of fourth density and to do our best to act out what that looks like to us in the best ways, in the most honest and sincere ways that we can. And I think that's really what a lot of the work is right now, is just putting on the training wheels and learning how to ride the bike. The bike's there. The training wheels can come off at any time, but it's not super easy to just hop on a 2-wheel bike and take off. You got to have that process of learning. So in 16.51, Don asks, can you define the word density as we have been using it to give us a little greater idea of the concept of this term when used by you? I am Ra. The term density is what you would call, mathematical one. The closest analogy is that of music, whereby after 7 notes on your Western type of scale, if you will, the 8th note begins a new octave. Within your great octave of existence which we share with you, there are 7 octaves or densities. Within each density, there are 7 subdensities. Within each subdensity, 7 sub-subdensities, and so on infinitely. So here, I don't feel like Ra necessarily defined density, but they did expand on the concept of how there are 8 notes in an octave, so there are 8 levels of densities in an octave, and they correspond sort of in that way. But then there's also this concept of subdensities and subdensities of subdensities. And so, we're in the probably highest subdensity of third density for the most part. Most of us are operating in those later subdensities of third density, but you could be operating in the first sub-subdensity of the 7th subdensity of third density, right? So you could be learning still red ray type lessons within the realm of the latest levels of third density, if that makes sense. It's something really to be pondered, and especially like when you're associated with chakras, I think, for me, to think about how, okay, well, yes, I'm dealing with yellow ray stuff, but I'm dealing with it in the higher levels of the third density octave, the higher sub-densities of the third density of the octave, whereas some other times, you might be operating in the lower levels of the sub-octaves of third density. It's very difficult to put into words, obviously. I'm struggling with it, but I think if you think about it a lot, you can sort of conceptualize all these different layers and how our experience flows through these densities and these subdensities, because there's an infinite potential for experience. So we're all in third density, but there are so many different layers to the third density experience that we, based on our own balance, our own polarity, our own energy body, are experiencing different levels of this third density. So in 1652, Don says, I noticed that the time we have used has gone slightly over an hour. I would prefer to continue, but I want to ask at this time as to the condition of the instrument. I am Ra. This instrument is in balance. It is well to continue if you desire. So again, this is a pretty long, the longest one so far. And Don notices that they've been going for a long time. I'm assuming Carla must have received a pretty strong energy transfer from Jim before this session or the night before, and that's giving her a lot of energy to have a longer session. So 16.53, Don says, all right, continuing with what we were just talking about, namely densities. I understand then that each density has 7 subdensities, which again have 7 subdensities, which again have 7 subdensities. This expands at an extremely large rate as things are increased in powers of 7. Does this mean that in any density level, anything that you can think of is happening, and many things that you never thought of are happening? Are there? Everything is happening. This is confusing. I am Ra. From your confusion, we select the concept with which you struggle, that being infinite opportunity. You may consider any possibility, probability complex as having an existence. So basically here Ra is saying, yeah, you can think of everything as possible because the creator is infinite. And while maybe the natural laws of third density make things quote unquote impossible, we are moving into fourth density. The planet is in fourth density. Therefore, our thoughts create reality on a much greater level. So it's appropriate to be expanding our thoughts through the concept of all possibilities are available. So like something I brought up before as a natural law and in relation to healing. If you lose a limb, you're not going to be able to grow that limb back, right? Well, in fourth density, maybe you can. Maybe you're more likely to. Or maybe we'll have developed even better and more useful prosthetics that give you basically the use of your arm back to almost full capacity. So just expanding our concept of what is possible, seeing all things as possible on some level, even if it isn't possible in this particular sub-density, third density that you are in right now, it's still possible somewhere else. And so Dawn has a few more questions about this concept. So in 1654, Dawn asks, does what we do when we think of possibilities that can occur, say daydreaming, do these become real in these densities? I am Ra. This depends upon the nature of the daydream. This is a large subject. Perhaps the simplest thing we can say is, if the daydream, as you call it, is one which attracts to self, this then becomes reality to self. If it is a contemplative general daydream, this may enter the infinity of possibility, probability complexes and occur elsewhere, having no particular attachment to the energy fields of the creator. So here Dawn is asking about daydreaming and how do these thought forms manifest, and Ross says that it is possible to manifest something that you focused hard upon if it's attracted to the self, that it can become reality to the self. But if you're just kind of having general daydreams without putting a lot of energy into attracting those daydreams to the self, then they will occur elsewhere, most likely. But they enter into the infinity of possibility, probability complexes. So essentially, by daydreaming, by creating these kinds of imaginary thought forms, we're still adding to the infinite nature of the creator and the infinite potential of reality. So in 1655, Dawn says, to make this a little more clear, if I were to daydream strongly about building a ship, would this occur in one of these other densities? I am Ra. This would have, or shall occur. And in 1656, Dawn asks, and then if, say, an entity daydreams strongly about battling, let us say, another entity, would this occur? I am Ra. In this case, the entity's fantasy concerns the self and other self. This binds the thought form to the possibility, probability complex connected with the self, which is the creator of this thought form. This then would increase the possibility, probability of bringing this into third density occurrence. So essentially, when you're having daydreams involving another self, you are increasing the possibility, probability of bringing this into third density occurrence. I think Ra might also kind of be saying here that if you're involving another self, it might not necessarily be that other self that you are creating the potential to battle with. I think in a lot of times you're more putting energy into the battle itself, and that's a lot more easier for third density to manifest. If you have a really strong desire to battle another being, it doesn't take a lot of effort for reality to put somebody in your path that you would have a battle with. But if it's a specific person, that takes a lot more effort, but it still becomes a greater probability. So in 1657, Dawn asks, does the Orion group use this principle to create conditions brought about to suit their purpose? I am Ra. We will answer more specifically than the question. The Orion group uses daydreams of hostile or other negative vibratory natures to feed back or strengthen these thought forms. So this is something I've talked about before when talking about channeling and how negative entities will often talk about catastrophes and disasters. I think that's their way of collectively strengthening this thought form and increasing its probability of coming into manifestation. But ultimately here, Ra is saying that a negative greeting might involve negative entities increasing the desire for these negative thought forms of contention and hostility, because ultimately what we think in our brain is what we are. Like in the acute moment, in the now moment, what we're thinking is what we are. But also the more we think about certain thoughts over and over and over again, we create deeper, stronger neural pathways. So if we're having lots and lots of fantasies that are hostile and violent, then that just creates more potential to manifest that in real life. And again, Ross says that we should experience all things desired, and we should try to limit the things that infringe upon the free will of others to just thoughts and daydreams. But you're still reinforcing those neural pathways of hostility and those desires of hostility. So that's why it's just really important to understand what thoughts we're engaging with, which ones we're giving our energy to, because just because a thought comes into your head doesn't mean you're putting any energy into it, right? But as soon as you do let yourself put energy into it, whether it's feeding anxiety into that thought, feeding fear into that thought, feeding a desire for violence into that thought, that then increases its potential for happening. So then Dawn in 1658 asks, do they ever use any, shall I say, gratifications of the physical body to amplify such daydreams? I am Ra. They are able to do this only when there is a strong ability on the part of the receiving mind-body-spirit complex towards the perception of thought forms. This could be termed an unusual characteristic, but has indeed been a method used by Orion entities. So, when we follow up here in the next question, Dawn gets a little more specific, asking if this pertains to wanderers. This isn't the only time Dawn asks this question about Orion energizing negative sexual desires. In the homosexuality session 31, which we will eventually get to and take apart, Dawn asks a series of questions regarding this as well. And I'm not sure if I've gone into this before, specifically about Dawn, but Dawn was sexually abused when he was a child. Dawn had a confusing sexual incident when he was a teenager with a family member who tied him and another person together, and some sexual experiences happened in that situation. So in the first few months when Dawn and Carla were together, they were having sex, but Dawn required Carla to be tied down to have sex with her. And ultimately this hurt Carla because she has rheumatoid arthritis and she wasn't able to do that very often or very much. And she basically straight up told Dawn, like, I don't want to do this. And so Dawn was like, okay, well, I'm going to be celibate then. It was like he could only have sex with her if she was willing to participate in sex in this relatively oppressive way. So I wonder if some of these questions with Dawn asking this wasn't his experience of feeling overwhelmed with this imbalanced sexual desire and the way that it would manifest. And that's probably for him why it was easier to just be celibate instead of trying to find a partner who was willing to participate in what was a relatively extreme, narrow set of circumstances that Dawn was willing to have sex in. And again, this was an expression of his trauma but he was also not really able to ever get past it and heal that in a healthy way so that he could have a quote-unquote normal sexual relationship with anybody. So I do think Don is asking this from experience because, like I said, he asks about this again at a later point, and these follow-up questions kind of make it seem like maybe he's asking about himself in a way. But yeah, that's a heavy hand of speculation, but I do think that it's possible that Don was experiencing violent sexual desires, that he didn't really understand why he was experiencing them, and is realizing that these desires were being energized likely by Orion entities who were trying to keep him away from having a productive sexual relationship with anybody. But here in the follow-up question, Don asks, the many wanderers coming to this planet now and in the recent past, are they subject to Orion thoughts? I am Ra. As we have said before, wanderers become completely the creature of third density in mind-body complex. There is just as much chance of such influence to a wanderer entity as to a mind-body spirit complex of this planetary sphere. The only difference occurs in the spirit complex, which, if it wishes, has an armor of light, if you will, which enables it to recognize more clearly that which is not as it would appropriately be desired by the mind-body spirit complex. This is not more than a bias and cannot be called an understanding. Furthermore, the wanderer is, in its own mind-body spirit complex, less distorted towards the, shall we say, deviousness of third density positive/negative confusions. Thus, it often does not recognize as easily as a more negative individual the negative nature of thoughts or beings. So, here Ross is saying that when a being wanders into third density, they become fully third density. The only benefit they have is their highly polarized spirit that they can call upon to give them some form of guidance via the bias of that polarity that allows them to recognize more clearly that which is not as it would be appropriately desired by the mind-body-spirit complex. So again, I believe we might be talking about Don's specific experience here. He recognizes that something is wrong, but he doesn't quite know what's going on. There's no understanding, but there is a bias telling him that something's off with this, right? And then the last part is interesting. It says the wanderer is less distorted towards the, shall we say, deviousness of third density positive negative confusions. Thus, it often does not recognize as easily as a more negative individual the negative nature of thoughts or beings. So sometimes wanderers are quite naive, essentially, about the potential negative expression, the hidden negative motivations of other people, or the negative potentials of the thought forms of other people. Because a lot of wanderers, let's say, we're talking about Ra wanderers. Ra wanderers on Venus, it came from Venus. Venus was a very harmonious planet. Then in sixth density, Ra comes to Earth because they want to help us, like other higher beings helped Venus. But Ra didn't have a good understanding of the negative potentials of their help in our negatively oriented social memory societal complex. So unfortunately, the naivete of the Confederation in the ways that it has tried to help our planet and failed miserably carries over also to wanderers. Wanderers aren't quite as adept at recognizing the hidden or negative motivations of other entities, whereas a being who has lived on Earth and incarnated as a third density being for 75,000 years, or maybe even came from Mars and Maldek and have even more experience in third density, in relatively negative third densities, would have more of an understanding of those potentials of negative manifestations of thought forms, just because they have more experience and have had to deal with it more directly in their more recent experience of self. So it's kind of like a twofold answer. The wanderer does have a spirit complex that has a bias that can throw up red flags if things are wrong. But if you aren't calling upon that potential bias of the spirit complex, then the third density wiring of confusion, even while being a wanderer, can make you more susceptible to people who are trying to manipulate you or lie to you, because you're taking them more at face value. You have more of a trust, you have more of a belief in the inherent goodness of people's desires and actions, which isn't necessarily there for a lot of people on Earth in third density right now. So we get another follow-up in 1660. Don asks, would then the Wanderers, as they incarnate here, be high priority targets, shall we say, of the Orion group? I am Ra. This is correct. And obviously, the Orion group wants to enslave other beings, but it's also beneficial for them to remove the potential for light in a positively polarized being. So a lot of the time when Orion entities target wanderers or positive beings, they know that they aren't going to be able to necessarily enslave them, but they might be able to distract them and depolarize them, which then lessens their ability to wield the light of the Creator in a way that creates positive catalyst for those around them. So ultimately, that is the goal of Orion entities with wanderers, is to keep them distracted, keep them in lower states of consciousness, discourage them, these kinds of things that will frustrate and have wanderers just throw their hands in the air and give up, even if it's for a brief period of time. So really, if you want to battle the Orion group, the best way to do that is to refuse to give in to these types of negative feelings of despair and hopelessness. Like, these are normal feelings, but there's a threshold that can be crossed where you sort of succumb to it, right? Where you succumb to despair and you indulge in this despair. And that, I think, creates a huge opening for Orion beings to plant other thought forms that are related to this despair that'll keep you in that despair for even longer. And that's why in the archetypal mind, the catalyst of the spirit is hope, because we always need to have hope and faith to be able to continue to move forward, trying to wield the light. Even if it seems hopeless, we can still have the faith that it's not. And that's a super powerful, positive act of will. So 16.61, Dawn asks, and if a wanderer were to be successfully infringed upon, shall I say, by the Orion group, what would happen to this wanderer at the harvest? I am Ra. If the wanderer entity demonstrated through action a negative orientation towards other self, it would be, as we have said before, caught into the planetary vibration and, when harvested, possibly repeat again the master cycle of third density as a planetary entity. This shall be the last full question of this session. Is there any short question we may answer before we close this session? So, here, again, Ra is saying that if a wanderer polarizes negatively to a significant extent, then they get caught in the planetary vibration and they will have to, especially at this point in time, at this harvest nexus, if you fail to maintain or reach again that harvestable vibration as a wanderer, then you get stuck back in the cycles of reincarnation for another master cycle of third density. So it's possible that that is a way that Orion also gains power. Maybe that is a type of enslavement by trapping a wanderer in the cycles of third density reincarnation. An Orion entity probably gains some sort of power by doing that. And so the final question, Dawn asks, only just to know if the instrument can be made more comfortable. I am Ra. This instrument is as comfortable as it is possible for you to make it, given the weakness distortions of its body complex. You are conscientious. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. So, as we can see by the length of this session, Carla was very balanced. Carla was as balanced as the distortions of her body complex would let her be. This might be one of the peak times of Carla's bodily balance, because this is one of the longer sessions that we have. So yeah, she's doing well in this session. And Ra has no notes for how to improve Carla's efficiency as an instrument at this point. So that was session 16. It was a nice long session. I'm sure once I edit this down, it's still going to be pretty close to 2 hours. Right now it's 2 hours and 8 minutes, so you'll see by the end how much dead air that I cut out, just to give you a reference. But this will probably take me a few days to edit, and then I'll get it posted, and then we'll keep moving forward to the best of my ability to keep discussing these sessions and talking about what Ra has to say and trying to figure it out, right? So I thank you all, as always. I thank our creator. I thank this wonderful experience that we get to have. I'm full of gratitude. I really, truly love doing this. And I really appreciate all the people who have already reached out to me with gratitude for receiving this. It really means a lot that it's able to help people, and getting that feedback right away, it's awesome, right? I try not to have any sort of attachment to the outcome, obviously. I'm not counting my views or anything like that, but it is cool to hear from people who are excited to listen to this, because that just makes me more excited to record it, which I'm already really excited to do this because I have a lot of fun and I'm learning so much. So I will see you all next time with session 17.